he shouldn't have survived. 3 Marines left for dead, tied across the rusted tracks of a forgotten freight line in Montana. And yet, from the shadows of a burned-out tree line came something no one expected. A stray German shepherd, limping, scarred, eyes burning with purpose. No name, no handler, just a mission in his bones. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a miracle carved out of ice, fire, and faith. This dog didn't save soldiers. He resurrected brothers. He turned a battlefield into a beginning. And by the end, he reminded a broken town what it means to believe again. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe God still sends angels in fur and fury, hit subscribe, because this story will leave you whispering, Amen. The wind that swept across Rock Ridge in early November carried with it a quiet bitterness, dry, sharp, and humming through the pines like a whisper of something unspoken. Nestled in the mountainous wilderness of Montana, the once mining town sat forgotten, its rusting silos groaning under their own weight, and its rail lines weaving through the forest like long-forgotten veins. The sky, the color of tarnished silver, pressed low over the trees, and the air tasted of frost and ash. Along a stretch of warped rail track that hadn't seen a passenger in years, the forest held its breath. 100 yards away, a large German shepherd moved through the underbrush with a cautious gait, favoring his right hind leg, a ghost of an old injury. His coat was once a brilliant sable, but years of dust and solitude had dulled it into the color of dry stone. His name was Bran, though no one had spoken it aloud in years. He had once belonged to a combat handler stationed in Afghanistan, a young woman named Clara Oates. She had trained him to detect explosives, to read human stress from breath alone, to act without hesitation when a life needed saving. When Clara didn't make it back from their final deployment, Bran had been discharged, rehomed once, then again, and finally abandoned during a storm off Highway 93. He had since survived off instinct and memory, growing lean but never mean, his mind sharp, and his loyalty misplaced but not extinguished. That morning Bran had been tracking the scent of elk along a shallow ravine when something unfamiliar cut across the wind. Burnt rubber, sweat, and fear. He froze. His ears stood alert. His breath slowed. Then it came. The distant metallic screech of a train breaking far up the line. It was not due. Nothing was. His nose twitched, and he turned toward the tracks. Not far from the clearing, where the rusted rails stretched over gravel and frost, 3 men lay motionless. Their bodies were tied with nylon cord, wrists behind backs, ankles crossed, mouths gagged with strips of faded cloth. One of them stirred slightly, groaning against the silence. Logan Price, 32, former Marine Staff Sergeant, had the compact build of a sprinter and the weather-worn skin of someone who'd spent half his life in the sun. Calm and calculating, Logan had led recon teams through the worst terrain in the world. His sharp jaw was stained with blood from a split lip, and his left arm hung limp from a dislocated shoulder. He wasn't panicking, but his pulse thundered. He had been through IED blasts, but nothing felt quite like hearing steel on steel and knowing your body was laid out across tracks like meat on a butcher's board. Beside him lay Hank Morrison, the oldest among them at 38. Broad-shouldered, with crow's feet etched deep beside eyes that had seen too much, Hank had once been a heavy gunner. His body bore scars from shrapnel and time, but his resolve hadn't dulled. He was stubborn, a man who didn't speak unless necessary, and when he did, it was final. His thick beard was matted with dirt, and one eye was swollen shut. Beneath the grime, his mind replayed the moment they were ambushed. He remembered the whir of a drone, the crunch of gravel under boots that weren't theirs. The third, Nico Rivas, 29, had been the heart of the team. Slimmer than the others, wiry and fast, with olive skin and wide, expressive eyes, Nico had a motor mouth and a humor that kept spirits up, even when rations were down. His family had crossed from Mexico 3 generations ago. He had enlisted at 18, hoping to bring pride to a last name that bore too many debts. Nico's wrists were raw from struggling, but his eyes darted from Logan to Hank, desperate for any sign they weren't done for. The 3 had been on a silent recon mission, investigating an abandoned freight route rumored to be used for moving people, illegally, in darkness, through forgotten shafts and tunnels. They had been careful, running sweeps, radio silent, gear tight. But someone had known. Someone had been waiting. Bran crept closer. The scent was overwhelming now. Blood, fear, adrenaline. He pressed low to the ground, eyes narrowing, reading the body language of the tied men. One moved, a twitch of the leg. Another blinked slowly. Not dead. Not yet. He stepped out onto the gravel, the cold rock biting at his pads. Logan's eyes flicked toward the movement. For a second, disbelief passed over his face. A dog? Out here? Bran padded closer. His breath steamed in the cold. He tilted his head, studying the bindings, sniffing once at Logan's shoulder. Then, with sudden purpose, he turned his teeth gently onto the knots, pulling, gnawing, tugging. The rope resisted, but not for long. When the gag fell from Logan's mouth, his voice rasped, "Help the others." The sound of the train returned, louder now. A far-off horn, still distant but no longer idle. "God!" Nico croaked, eyes wide. "It's real! It's coming!" Bran pulled harder, freeing Logan's hands. Logan grunted through pain as his shoulder shifted, then snapped back with a sickening pop. He choked down the scream and moved to Hank. The rail beneath them began to hum. Vibrations. Time counted in seconds. Bran moved to Nico, paws slipping on the gravel, and tore at the final binding. The train's headlamp emerged around the bend, no more than a mile out. "Hank, up!" Logan shouted, dragging him by the collar. "Nico, crawl!" The men staggered to their feet, legs numb and slow. Bran barked, a short, sharp sound, and bolted toward the tree line. Logan followed, half carrying Hank. Nico stumbled behind, boots catching on loose stones. The whistle of the train screamed across the valley like a banshee. They made it across the far rail as the engine roared past, the air erupting in a wall of sound and wind. Nico collapsed, gasping. Hank leaned on a tree, eyes closed. Logan dropped to one knee, staring at the dog who now stood a few feet away, watching them. "Who the hell?" Nico panted. Bran gave no answer. He turned and trotted back into the woods, pausing only once to look back. The scent of hot steel lingered in the air long after the train had screamed past, stirring the brittle pines of Rockridge. The wind blew sharp and cold through the narrow cut in the forest where the tracks split the earth. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with the echo of what had almost been lost. Logan knelt on the gravel, muscles trembling, his chest rising and falling in short bursts. He reached out a hand, brushing the scruff of the large dog that had impossibly dragged him from death. Bran stood still, ears perked, his eyes dark and unreadable. The past had risen like smoke in his nostrils. He didn't understand everything, but the urgency was something his bones remembered. Bran had been taught to read danger in silence. They had made it. Logan, Hank, and Nico, all three were alive, barely. Hank leaned against the base of a pine tree, one arm pressed against his ribs. Nico sat nearby, cradling his left hand, which had been torn raw from the ropes. "He saved us," Nico said, voice hoarse. "That dog? He pulled you out first. I saw it." Logan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I don't know where he came from, but we owe him." As if in response, Bran turned his head toward the deeper woods and gave a low growl. His nose dipped to the wind, ears twitching. His instincts, sharp from years of surviving in silence, whispered that they weren't alone. Before Logan could speak, the dog slipped back into the underbrush, vanishing as quickly as he had come. The forest closed behind him. They had to move. The ambush that led to their capture hadn't been random. Someone knew their route, knew they would pass through the old switchyard. And the way the knots had been tied, tight, practiced, it wasn't the work of amateurs. They couldn't return to base, not yet. Their comms had been stripped, and Logan wasn't sure if their extraction point had been compromised too. He scanned the tree line, jaw clenched. "We go east, stay off the path, find shelter, regroup." Hank nodded. "And the dog?" Logan didn't answer, because Bran wasn't a question, he was a ghost. Bran's paws padded silently over frostbitten soil, his gait sure, though his leg ached. He moved by scent, not sight, his mind pulling him not forward, but backward into memory, the smell of fire, of sweat, of sand, of Clara. Clara Oates had been just 23 when the military assigned her to Bran. She was tall, lean, with sun-freckled skin and sandy hair always pulled into a loose bun under her cap. Her voice was calm, never rushed, but her eyes were quick and alert. She walked like a person used to carrying weight without complaint. Clara had lost her father, a firefighter, when she was 9, and that grief had turned into resolve. She joined the Marines because she wanted to run into danger, not away from it. Bran had been her first assignment. "He's too smart for his own good," the kennel master had warned. "Watches everything, waits before he acts. Could be stubborn." Clara had smiled and knelt beside him. "Good," she said. "So do I." They trained for months, voice commands, scent tracking, explosive detection. But the connection had come in moments unscripted. When she slipped him scraps under the table, when she whispered to him during storms, when he pressed against her side after they lost someone in the field. And in Kandahar, on a road that wasn't marked on any map, she had ordered him to stay while she disarmed a roadside device. He obeyed. It was the last time he saw her alive. After Clara's death, Bran had been flown back stateside. The new handler hadn't bonded with him. He was passed from one handler to another, then listed as unstable. Eventually, someone wrote unfit for reconditioning on his file. They sent him to a foster. When that didn't work, someone left the gate open near the edge of Rockridge. That was years ago. But the scent of burning steel had awakened something older than time. Night was falling. Logan and the others stumbled into a collapsed ranger post deep in the woods. The roof sagged, and vines crept through the walls, but it had a fireplace and partial shelter. Logan lit a small fire using the flint hidden in his boot heel. They huddled around it, steam rising from their clothes. Nico dozed with his back against a crate, lips still cracked from thirst. Hank tended his own ribs with a torn scrap of shirt. Bran returned just before dark. He emerged from the shadows without a sound, carrying a half-eaten rabbit in his jaws. He dropped it in front of the fire and sat down. Logan stared at him. "You hunted for us?" Bran didn't move. But when Logan reached slowly, the dog allowed him to stroke the fur between his ears. "He's not just wild," Hank murmured. "He knows things." "Yeah," Logan said. "He's trained, maybe ex-military." As they cleaned the rabbit and put it to fire, Logan's thoughts ran ahead. Whoever had left them tied on the tracks hadn't done it for sport. It was a message, and someone had wanted that message to end in a wreckage. The fire cracked. Outside, the trees whispered under the moonlight. The broken station moaned in the wind, and across the frozen tracks, a man in a dark parka crouched beside the wreckage of rope and blood. His eyes, small and sunken, scanned the ground with practiced ease. He picked up a scrap of cloth still damp with sweat, held it to his nose, and smiled. He stood, tapped the side of his ear where a communication piece gleamed, and muttered one word: "Survived." The cold crept through the splintered boards of the abandoned ranger station like a second skin. Morning light filtered through gaps in the timber, painting the dust in gold and gray streaks. The fire had long since died out, leaving only ash and the faint scent of rabbit grease hanging in the air. Nico Rivas stirred first, his fingers twitching beneath the borrowed army poncho Bran had dragged from a forgotten supply shed nearby. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, the ceiling above him, the wooden beams sagging under years of moss and snow, looked like the low slats of a coffin. "We didn't die," he muttered. "Unfortunately," came Hank Morrison's gravelly reply. He sat nearby on an overturned crate, nursing his bruised ribs. His square jaw was still stained with dried blood, and the swelling around his left eye had formed a deep violet crescent. His breath came short, but his posture was soldier straight, shoulders squared beneath the torn remnants of his jacket. Hank was a man built to endure, not question. Logan Price stood just beyond the doorway, silhouetted against the slate-colored morning. He had removed his outer layer, revealing the sweat-darkened olive shirt beneath. His right shoulder had been hastily rewrapped with strips of shirt fabric, and his fingers worked methodically to clean the bolt of a compact sidearm they'd managed to retrieve from the wreckage of the ambush. The lines on his face were deeper now, carved not by age, but by calculation. Logan was always planning, always reading 5 steps ahead, an instinct sharpened by years in reconnaissance and the price of seeing good men fall. Bran lay beside the doorway, resting his muzzle on crossed paws. His ears flicked occasionally, alert to the forest's whispers. His breath was steady, but his eyes never closed. The weight of his own survival, the missions left unfinished, the handler buried in sand, was carried in the stiffness of his body and the tight set of his jaw. "So," Nico said, his voice cracking, "who wants to talk about how we ended up trussed like Thanksgiving turkeys?" "We were burned," Logan said, still not turning around. "Someone gave up our route." "Could have been intel leak," Hank added. "Someone in the network. Or our gear." "Which is why we're not going back to base. Not yet," Logan said. He turned then, expression unreadable. "I want to know what we stumbled into." Bran stood. Without sound or ceremony, he moved out of the shelter and into the woods. A few heartbeats later, Logan followed. Hank looked at Nico, shrugged once, then rose to limp after them. The forest was half frozen, the dirt beneath the pines stiff but not yet snow-covered. Frost clung to every branch, and their boots left prints like bruises across the mossy floor. Bran led the way up a ridge where the trees grew thinner and the land tilted into shadow. At the top, a large granite outcropping jutted from the hillside like the back of some ancient beast. It was there that Logan saw it, etched deep into the stone, a triangle enclosed within a circle, weather-worn but unmistakable. "What the hell is that?" Nico asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I've seen it before," Logan muttered. "Back in Helmand, a cartel stash. It wasn't just about drugs, it was about movement, people, weapons, secrets." "Same mark?" Hank asked. "Exactly the same." But the symbol wasn't the only thing that caught his eye. Near the base of the stone lay a crumpled piece of weatherproof paper, half tucked beneath a root. Logan bent down, carefully pulling it free. A faded topographic map, edges torn, mud splattered. The route they'd been assigned was marked in red, but there was more, an extension drawn in pencil, trailing eastward beyond their original objective. And then a second, newer tear, clean and precise, as if a portion had been deliberately removed. He turned the map over. On the back, in cramped capital letters, someone had written, "No entry without the mark." Logan's jaw tightened. "We weren't just intercepted," he said. "We were rerouted." "You're saying someone fed us bad coordinates on purpose?" Nico asked. "Not just bad, bait." Bran growled low, drawing their eyes to a nearby tree stump. Logan crouched, brushing aside a layer of frost. There were boot prints, fresh, at least 2 pairs, and drag marks. Something heavy. Recently moved. "Someone's close," Hank said. "Too close." "We need to shift position," Logan said, "and get to higher ground." By midday, they found shelter under an overhang of slate and dry pine, the mouth of a small cave just wide enough to conceal them. It wasn't comfort, but it was cover. Logan laid the map flat, anchoring the corners with rocks. He studied every line. Bran lay beside him, his breath warming the edge of the paper. The dog's gaze was fixed on the torn corner. Nico sat cross-legged, twirling a twig between his fingers. "So this symbol, whoever they are, they've got people in our chain?" "Or someone bought access," Hank muttered. "Money goes a long way in shadows." "Either way," Logan said, "this wasn't about killing us. It was about testing us. Seeing if we'd find this." He pointed to the symbol again. The trap wasn't to end us. It was to see who'd survive it. As night crept in again, Nico built a small smokeless fire using dry twigs and pine cones. The light flickered across Bran's coat, casting shadows on the stone behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Hank broke the silence. "You think we're the only ones who've been here?" "No," Logan said. "I think we're just the first ones who walk back out." The sun never truly rose in Rockridge that morning. A fog hung low, gray and heavy, turning the pines into phantoms and swallowing the sky in silence. The earth felt damp and ancient beneath their boots, the ground spongy with moss and memories no one had asked to recall. Logan moved first, guiding their path with deliberate care, eyes scanning the landscape for unnatural breaks in pattern. Tilted soil, shattered bark, disturbed roots. Hank trailed close behind, his breathing shallower than the day before. Nico brought up the rear, his movements quieter now. The humor in his eyes faded, replaced by a tension that lived just under his skin. And Bran, always slightly ahead, nose low, tail stiff, moved like a creature who already knew where the past was buried. They were searching for the scar in the forest. Around mid-morning, Bran stopped at the edge of a dense grove. The trees here grew tighter, knotted together like old secrets. A slight rise of land gave way to what looked like a rock slide. until Logan spotted the unnatural angle of iron beneath the lichen. "Here," he said, brushing back a veil of vines. What he revealed was not a rock, but the rusted edge of a metal hatch embedded into the hillside, its hinges nearly invisible under layers of rotten soil. "An old root cellar?" Nico asked. "No," Logan muttered. "Too reinforced. This was built to keep something in, or out." The hatch creaked when they pulled it open. The hinges gave like old bones, groaning under the weight of air that hadn't moved in years. A staircase descended into darkness, narrow and steep. Bran didn't wait. He stepped forward, pausing only to sniff the air, then vanished into the tunnel. Logan followed, weapon drawn, flashlight beam cutting through layers of dust. Hank and Nico came next, their boots thudding against iron steps slick with condensation. The tunnel widened into a chamber, not large, but deliberate. The walls were concrete, painted once, now peeling in long strips. Old bulbs hung from a wire that stretched the length of the ceiling, but none were lit. Near the back wall were chains bolted into the floor. One still held a single manacle, open. On the far side, a cot sat overturned, its mattress torn and stained. Nico swallowed hard. This isn't just a bunker, it's a cell. Hank moved toward the wall, where faint scratch marks formed a pattern. Not letters, not words, just lines. Hundreds of them. "Days," he said. Whoever was here counted time. Logan crouched near a pile of discarded cloth. Tucked beneath it was a journal. The cover was soft, worn leather, the corners curled like dried petals. He opened it slowly. Inside, cramped handwriting filled every page. No dates, just names. Nico leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" "Names," Logan said. "Dozens of them, maybe hundreds." Nico reached for the book, flipping through the pages until his fingers froze. He tapped one line. "Maya Morrison." Hank stopped moving. His head turned slowly, face like stone. "That's your last name, right?" Nico asked, his voice tentative. Hank walked over. He stared down at the page. "My niece. She disappeared 5 years ago. Everyone thought she ran away." Silence settled over them, heavy and stifling. Logan turned the last few pages. They were blank, except for a smear of something dried and brown. Blood, maybe. And one more name scrawled hurriedly across the inside back cover. "They said we don't exist." Behind them, Bran growled. His body shifted, fur bristling, gaze fixed on the narrow passage they had come through. Logan moved first, back toward the steps, raising his weapon. Then came the sound, barely audible like a shift in wind. But it wasn't wind. It was breath. Movement. Someone or something had been watching them. Then the explosion hit. It wasn't a fireball, not quite. More like a sudden wave of pressure that punched the walls inward and knocked all 3 men off their feet. Dirt and concrete dust rained from the ceiling. A section of the tunnel behind them collapsed with a roar, swallowing the stairwell in a cloud of smoke and grit. The chamber trembled. The chain bolts rattled. Nico coughed, waving a hand through the haze. "We're trapped?" Logan shook his head. "No, there's another way out. There has to be." Bran barked once and took off toward the back of the room. He circled the far wall, then began pawing at a seam nearly invisible in the stone. Logan joined him, brushing aside grime to reveal a panel, metal, hinged, with a mechanical latch corroded but intact. He pulled hard, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow shaft barely wide enough for 1 man at a time. They didn't speak as they crawled through it. Not until they emerged into the forest again, nearly 200 yards from where they'd entered. The hatch behind them was disguised under a tangle of blackberry bramble and dead leaves. Once they were out, Logan turned in a slow circle. "Whoever was here, they knew we were coming." Hank nodded, silent. Nico rubbed his arm, eyes distant. "And they didn't want us to leave." Far above them, on a ridge overlooking the scene, a woman knelt beside a spotting scope. Her name was Kendra Vale, a former intelligence analyst with a face shaped by long nights and too many secrets. Late 30s, tall and thin, with sharp cheekbones and short black hair tucked under a hood, she had once believed in systems, until they failed her. Now she worked alone. She watched the hatch close. "Contact made," she whispered into the mic clipped to her collar. "Subject still operational. Extraction not advised. They just stepped into something bigger than they know. The forest had turned from fog to frost. Each breath steamed in the stillness as the four of them moved through the undergrowth. Logan at the front, Nico and Hank close behind, and Bran ranging just ahead like a silent specter. The dog's movements were precise, deliberate. He would pause, sniff the wind, then take another few steps before repeating the process. His body was taut, head low, ears swiveling like radar dishes catching the faintest shifts in the air. Bran wasn't just searching, he was remembering. They had only been out of the first bunker for 2 hours, the scent of dust and fire still clinging to their clothes, when Bran began acting different. He circled a grove 3 times, then sat rigid at the base of a rock split by a thin fault. Without warning, he lunged forward, disappearing behind a bramble wall. Logan followed without hesitation, pushing through the thorns, ignoring the sting. The others came next, slower, more cautious. What they found beyond the brush was not a path, but a passage. It sloped downward between 2 ridges, overgrown and almost invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. The forest floor gave way to packed clay and old stone, the remains of what had once been a hidden access road. "Where the hell are we going?" Hank muttered. "Wherever he remembers," Logan answered, his voice lower than usual. He paused, letting his hand rest briefly on Bran's shoulder. The dog didn't flinch. His eyes stayed forward, and for a moment, Logan thought of another hand years ago, calloused, ink-stained, always steady, resting on his shoulder just before deployment. Sergeant First Class Jordan Weller. Stocky, with a crooked nose and a growl of a laugh. Taught Logan everything about leadership, how it wasn't always barking orders, but knowing when to listen, when to trust. Weller had once told him, if your gut tells you the answer, listen. But if your teammate's gut speaks louder, shut up and follow. Even if that teammate's got pause. It had been a joke, but Weller never joked unless it was true. Logan took a breath. Let him lead. The passage narrowed after a mile. Roots hung like chandeliers from the ceiling. Bran stopped at what looked like a wall of stone, then began to scratch at the base. The earth crumbled slightly, revealing a thin crack. Logan pressed forward and found a hinge, rusted and ancient. But there. Together they pulled until the stone face shifted inward. What opened wasn't a tunnel. It was a hollow, wide and deep, held up by old mining supports and riddled with pipes, beams, and corridors long since abandoned. The smell hit them like a wave, damp, coppery, and faintly antiseptic. It didn't smell like time. It smelled like use. They entered. Nico was the first to see the light, faint, flickering, not from bulbs, but from candles. One glowed behind a half-closed metal grate. He rushed forward, heart pounding. Behind the bars were 2 figures. One lay still on a cot, the other stood weakly, her hand gripping the edge of the gate. Nico froze. The woman standing was in her early 20s, painfully thin but tall, with deep brown eyes and a face too familiar. Her hair had once been jet black, now dulled with grime, but it still fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her left cheek bore a healing bruise, and her lower lip was cracked. But the shape of her jaw, the small scar above her eyebrow. "Ruby?" Nico said, voice breaking. She blinked, then nodded, slowly, as if the action required permission. "I thought," he choked. "They told us you ran, that you—" "I didn't," she whispered. "I tried." Logan moved to the door, examining the lock. It wasn't modern, just old-fashioned iron, reinforced by chains. Bran let out a sharp bark and disappeared down a side corridor. "We need something to break this," Hank said. "Crowbar, bolt cutters, hell, even pipe pressure." "No," Logan said. "There's got to be a master key, or something they use to access this regularly." As if summoned, Bran returned moments later with a limp piece of canvas in his teeth. Inside were tools, half-rusted, bundled tight. Logan dug through and found a ring of keys. The third one clicked. The gate swung open, and Ruby collapsed forward into Nico's arms. She clung to him, her frame shaking. Behind her, the second woman stirred. Logan approached carefully. "Ma'am?" She turned slowly. Older than Ruby, mid-30s maybe, with striking green eyes and cropped blonde hair matted to her scalp. Her skin was pale, sickly, but her gaze was alert. "I'm Claire," she said. "We weren't the only ones." Where are the others? Hank asked. They moved them last night, Claire whispered. Said there was a breach. They packed up fast. Took everything. Everyone. We were too weak to walk. Why leave you? Logan asked. Claire coughed hard, then smirked, bitter. Insurance, bait. Or maybe they just didn't care anymore. Logan glanced at Nico, who was still gripping Ruby like she might vanish again. We need to move, now, he said. They emerged back into the forest under a canopy of silence. Logan carried Claire half-supported. Hank kept scanning behind them. Nico walked with Ruby, neither speaking. Bran led. They didn't know who had built the tunnels, not yet. They didn't know who had sent the false orders or why their mission had become a manhunt. But they had names now. Faces. Proof. And someone, somewhere, had just lost their leverage. The forest thickened around them as dusk bled into night. The air had a glassy stillness, as if the trees themselves were holding breath. Logan's breath fogged in short bursts, his free hand gripped tightly around the secure comms unit he'd salvaged from a hidden cache near the western trail marker. One of several he and Weller had stashed years ago during training drills no one but them had considered necessary. He knelt beside a gnarled cedar, its trunk scarred with old Ranger etchings, and dialed in the encryption code. The device crackled to life, static, then a brief tone, then silence. Come on, Logan muttered. A beat. Then a clipped voice came through, tinny but clear. Alpha 6, this is Ironhawk. Authenticate. Logan's fingers danced over the keypad. Code 7, Gulf 9-4. Priority extract, 5 personnel. Sector Bravo 7 Sierra. A pause. Confirmed. ETA, 90 minutes. Extraction zone. Logan looked toward a clearing to the north, a former logging lot now overgrown but still flyable. Old sawmill site, northeast ridge. Copy. Maintain low signature. Confirm flare on arrival. Logan clicked off the unit and exhaled. We've got a ride. Behind him, the others gathered near a small clearing. Nico sat with Ruby, wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders. Her skin was pallid under the starlight, but her posture had shifted. From collapsed to upright, from defeated to alert. Claire leaned against a rock, sipping from a canteen. Her hands still shook, but there was steel returning to her gaze. Hank, however, stood apart. His back was turned, one hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. His shoulders were tight, like cables stretched too far. Logan noticed it immediately. You good? He asked quietly. Hank didn't answer right away. Then, I saw the face of the guy running the perimeter when we moved through the bunker. He turned slowly. It was Grant. Logan frowned. Grant, as in, first recon Fallujah, we did 2 tours together. Hank's voice was low, controlled. He saved my ass, twice. Logan's jaw tightened. And now he's guarding prisoners in a backwoods hellhole. Yeah. They stood in silence. The implications hung heavy between them. He always talked about how the system failed people like us, Hank added, voice rough. Said if the mission didn't have orders, it wasn't worth following. Logan glanced at Bran, who lay curled at the edge of the clearing, but opened one eye at the sound of movement. People like that don't flip overnight, he said. Something pushed him. Doesn't excuse it, Hank muttered, but it makes it harder. Yeah, Logan said, it always does. They began moving just after full dark, navigating by moonlight and a map Logan had etched from memory. The old sawmill site lay just beyond the ridge, past a collapsed trail marker and the remains of a storm-felled power line. Bran took point again, tail stiff, his movements faster now, more urgent. At the halfway point, the group paused beneath a dead oak, its limbs outstretched like the fingers of a broken clock. Logan raised a hand for silence. They all froze. Footsteps. Close. Heavy. Not running. Patrolling. A figure emerged near the base of the ridge, flashlight bobbing against a shoulder. The beam cut through the dark, sweeping lazily, unaware of its proximity to danger. Logan crouched, motioning for Nico to cover Ruby and Claire. Hank drew his sidearm but didn't raise it. Then Bran moved. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just launched from the shadows like a bullet with fur. The man didn't even scream, only staggered as a mass of muscle and teeth took him to the ground. There was a thud, a gasp, and then silence. Logan approached fast, weapon up. The man on the ground groaned, his hand twitching toward a holstered pistol, but Bran pressed a paw down hard on his wrist, growling low now. "Don't," Logan said. "He'll break your arm before you even touch it." The man, mid-40s, wiry, with a buzz cut and a jagged scar along his left cheek, looked up. His eyes widened. "Price?" Logan paused. "You know me?" The man coughed. "We heard you were dead." "Yeah, well, not today." He glanced at the patch on the man's shoulder. Black triangle over red background. No name tag, no unit. "What is this? Who are you working for?" The man didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Logan motioned to Hank. "Zip tie him." As Hank moved in, the man spoke again, quiet but bitter. "You think rescuing 2 girls undoes the rest? You're too late, Price. The plan's already in motion." "What plan?" Logan snapped, but the man only smiled. "You'll see." Bran bared his teeth, a low rumble vibrating through his chest. They reached the extraction site minutes before the helo arrived. The sound came low and steady, blades slicing through the cold night. The downwash flattened the grass and sent dry leaves skittering in all directions. The blackbird landed like a whisper, its doors already open. 2 medics jumped out, one kneeling beside Ruby, the other lifting Claire into a harness. Nico climbed aboard next, never letting go of Ruby's hand. Hank shoved their captive into the rear with a grimace. Bran leapt in without command. Logan stood at the edge of the clearing, his silhouette backlit by the spinning rotors. He scanned the tree line once more, eyes searching for anything. Any one he'd missed. Nothing. He stepped into the chopper just as it lifted off. The forest fell away beneath them, dark and ancient and full of unanswered questions. The chopper cut through the dawn, slicing pale gold into the freezing mist that clung to the mountains like a second skin. From above, Rockridge looked small and ancient, wounds of industry still visible in the rusted scars of old rails and mine shafts. But to the 5 people aboard, the town below meant something different now. It was the place where ghosts began to speak again. The moment the rotors slowed, Logan jumped out, scanning the perimeter instinctively. The landing zone was secure, an old ranger station on the outskirts of town, now used for emergency relief. Ruby was wheeled out first, eyes half closed but alert. Claire followed, supported by 2 medics, her steps uneven but stronger than before. Nico hovered at Ruby's side, talking softly, though no one could quite hear the words. Hank stepped out next, glancing up at the rising sun, with the guarded look of a man who'd stopped trusting daylight long ago. Bran was last. The dog hesitated at the edge of the ramp, nose twitching. The cold air carried something familiar. Pine smoke, salt from melting roads, the scent of a place that once tried to forget him. Then he stepped forward, stiff-legged but steady. A slight limp dragged his rear paw. He ignored it. At the edge of the station yard stood a woman wrapped in a red wool coat. Her gray hair was pulled back into a low bun, her cheeks flushed by the wind, her hands clenched white around a scarf. Her name was Maria Rivas, and she hadn't seen her daughter in over 4 years. When Ruby stepped off the platform, Maria didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply walked forward, placed a shaking hand on Ruby's face, and whispered, "My baby." Ruby leaned into her, thin arms barely reaching around her mother's back, and finally let the tears come. The reunion didn't last long. Logan pulled Nico aside as medics ushered Ruby and Claire into the main building. "We still have a name," he said. "Caleb." Nico wiped his face. "The guy they mentioned?" Logan nodded. Claire recognized the name, said he visited the bunkers, wore civilian gear, gave orders, never used a radio. Too careful. "And now?" Nico asked. "Disappeared," Logan replied, "but we have an idea." 2 hours later, they stood outside an old hunter's cabin, camouflaged deep within the northern woodline, its chimney cold, its windows boarded, except for one slat bent just enough to see out. Logan had received the tip from Kendra Vale, former analyst turned rogue observer, whose voice had returned to the comm line like a phantom, saying only, "He's there, but he won't be for long." The team approached with care. No flashy tech, no helicopters, just muscle, instincts, and Bran. The dog moved low to the ground, pausing once to sniff the base of a spruce tree before continuing toward the door. Logan signaled Hank to flank left, while Nico moved right. Bran reached the porch first. Inside, a figure moved, a shadow behind frost-glazed glass. Logan stepped into view. "Caleb Dorn, step out. We know who you are." The door creaked open, slowly. Caleb emerged, hands up, a slow, smug smile creasing his weathered face. Early 50s, thick-set, with salt and pepper hair and a prominent scar down the right side of his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, but calculating. "You've been busy," he said. "So have you," Logan replied. "Only difference is we saved people." "Ah," Caleb said. "But did you save enough?" Before Logan could answer, Bran barked sharply. His body shifted, tense. From behind the cabin, a second figure appeared, tall, hooded, armed. Hank reacted first, tackling the man into the snow. A scuffle, a grunt, then silence. Logan moved forward and cuffed Caleb. "You're done." "You don't get it," Caleb hissed. "You've only dug up one bone. There's a whole graveyard beneath Rockridge." The ride back was quiet. Caleb sat cuffed in the back of a secured jeep, flanked by 2 federal agents who had arrived just in time to escort him to a holding cell. Claire, though tired, had agreed to provide testimony. Ruby wrote a statement that same night. Her words were hesitant but honest, every line a shard of survival. As the sun dipped behind the tree line, Logan made his way to the local field clinic where Bran had been taken for medical review. The building was small, brick-faced, with only 2 exam rooms. Inside, a young vet named Dr. Elise Monroe stood beside the examining table. She was petite, with chestnut hair and a braid down her back, and blue eyes sharp with both kindness and command. She smiled faintly when she saw Logan. "He's stubborn," she said, gesturing to Bran, who lay on the floor with a bandaged leg. "Tried to stand before I was done." "He's earned the right," Logan replied. "He has nerve damage in the hind leg," Elise explained. "Old injury, untreated. I'll be honest, it hurts him, but it doesn't stop him." "Nothing does," Logan murmured. He crouched beside Bran and gently scratched behind his ear. The dog's eyes closed slightly, the only sign of approval he ever gave. Logan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I need your signature," he said to Elise. She took it, scanned the text. "Application for military service recognition?" "Honorable K-9 discharge under Allied mission protocol," Logan confirmed. "He wasn't just a dog out there. He was the reason we made it back." Elise looked down at Bran, then back at Logan. "I'll sign it." That night, in the makeshift command trailer, Logan handed the form to a liaison officer who promised it would reach the proper desk at DOD. As he stepped out, snow began to fall, light, gentle, like the first layer of healing over an old wound. Behind him, the town of Rockridge slept for the first time in years without fear. Snow still clung to the northern shadows of Rockridge, nestled in the roots of trees and the cracks between stones, but the sky had turned. It was the kind of early spring morning where the sun felt like a truce, where cold bowed its head and began to retreat. The air carried the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and wood smoke from chimneys that hadn't burned in peace for years. But today, there was something more, something warm. Anticipation. The town square had never seen so many people. Old storefronts had been swept clean, a temporary platform erected in front of the courthouse, and folding chairs lined up in neat rows across the green. Children sat on their parents' laps, elders huddled in worn coats, and volunteers from the local VFW passed out hot coffee in paper cups. On the stage stood Mayor Evelyn Wren, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, in a tidy twist, and a tailored navy coat buttoned to the collar. She was short and serious, with eyes that once taught literature at the local high school, but now looked out over a town she had fought hard not to lose. Her voice was firm as she stepped to the podium. "Today," she said, "we honor not just the courage of men, but the spirit of those who chose to return, who saw pain and walked toward it, who saw darkness and brought a light." Behind her stood Logan, Hank, and Nico, each in clean field uniforms, medals on their chests, boots shined. But it was Bran who drew every gaze. The dog stood at Logan's side, head high, coat brushed until it shone like sable under the rising sun. His limp was still there, but softened, less from pain and more from memory. Mayor Wren continued, "And today, we acknowledge someone who cannot speak for himself, but whose actions spoke for many. A dog without a unit, without a handler, without a home. until he made one. Bran. A small man with rounded glasses and a box in hand stepped forward. This was Marshal Quinn, the state liaison for law enforcement K-9 commendations. Balding, nervous in front of crowds, but sincere. He opened the box and removed a dark velvet collar, fitted with a polished silver tag. He handed it to Logan. Logan crouched before Bran, meeting the dog's gaze. "No longer stray," he said softly. "Not forgotten." He slipped the collar around Bran's neck, his fingers brushing the engraved words. "Not a stray, an unnamed hero." The crowd stood and clapped. Bran didn't bark, didn't wag, but he sat tall, still, his head tilted toward the sun, as if it were the only thing that made sense in a world too often cruel. Later, as the square emptied and children returned to throwing snowballs into the melting ditches, the team gathered again, this time in the woods just outside of town, at the place where it had all begun. The clearing was small, ringed by pines, the earth still soft where the bunker had once hidden beneath. Federal agents had sealed it, mapped it, and left it behind. But for those who stood there now, it was something more. Logan held a sapling in one hand, an apple tree, bare branches but strong roots wrapped in burlap. He knelt and dug the hole with slow, deliberate motions. Hank and Nico helped, their hands covered in wet soil. When the hole was ready, Ruby stepped forward. She looked stronger now, color back in her cheeks, her posture less guarded. She wore a red scarf around her neck, the same one her mother had worn that first morning. In her hand was a ribbon, old and faded, cut from one of her childhood dresses. She tied it gently around the base of the sapling. "No more hiding," she whispered. The tree stood tall in the center of the clearing, a symbol of what had been buried and what had returned. That afternoon, back in town, Hank sat quietly on the porch of the guest lodge, a folded letter in his hands. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for finding my sister. Thank you for bringing her home. We thought she was gone forever. We couldn't even say goodbye. Because of you, we can now say hello again." Signed, the family of Maya Morrison. Hank folded the letter, tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, and looked out at the street where Ruby and Nico were walking side by side, laughing softly. Inside, Logan sat beside a wood stove in the lobby. Bran lay curled at his feet, one eye open, one ear flicked toward the door. The warmth from the fire reached them both. A soft knock came. It was Elise Monroe, the veterinarian. Her braid was damp from the melting snow, her cheeks pink. She smiled. "I just came to check in on the patient." Logan nodded toward Bran. "He's got a new uniform." Elise crouched and scratched under Bran's chin. "I'd say it suits him." Then more quietly, "And how about you? Are you staying?" Logan glanced at the fire, then at Bran. "I think we both earned the right to stop running." Sometimes God doesn't send miracles with thunder or lightning. Sometimes he sends them on 4 legs through the forest, carrying pain and purpose in silence. Bran was never just a dog. He was a reminder that even those forgotten by the world are never forgotten by God. That healing doesn't always come loud, but it always comes for those who keep walking through the cold. This story isn't just about courage in combat or strength in crisis. It's about what happens when grace finds its way into broken places, through a dog who had no name, a town that had lost hope, and people who chose to keep loving after they had every reason to stop. Maybe you're facing something today that feels too heavy to carry. Maybe you feel unseen, unheard, or left behind. But remember this: God sees even the sparrow fall, and he remembers the quiet ones too, the ones who limp but still walk forward. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and type Amen if you believe that even a stray can be chosen, that no one is beyond redemption, and that God still works miracles in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe for more stories that prove light still shines in the darkest places. And may God bless you and your family wherever you are.